Don't act without understanding what your outcome is. Don't act without thinking about what could go wrong. I came out of EY a better person, a better technologist, a better leader. And, my recommendation for anyone in college thinking about a career in technology, spent 3 years at a Big Four. It's a fantastic training ground.
From leading global security operations at Ericsson and Sutherland to advising giants like Ernst & Young, John Shende has built a career at the forefront of cybersecurity, cloud, and digital transformation. A strategist, innovator, and CTO of Thales Cybersecurity, he turns complex global threats into scalable, future-ready solution.
One of the things that people talk about a lot is controls. But the issue is not whether an organization can name the right controls they have in place. It's how are those controls attached to a point of decision. That's the most important thing.
You've been speaking and writing on the idea that AI is becoming the new insider threat. What does that actually look like?
One of the things that I've seen is overprivileged access that agentic AI systems have.
One thing you'd pass on to every technical leader building fast right now, what would it be? Welcome to Automate or Die Trying, the show where moving fast and staying secure isn't a contradiction, it's the job. I'm your host, Will Ramos, and today I'm sitting down with John Shende. John is currently a CTO of Data Security and AI at Thales and a Global VP of SecOps at Sutherland, where he partnered with Google Security to transform their SOC from the ground up, working 12 to 15 hours a day for the first 4 months, retiring a legacy system, and standing up a modern AI ML-driven operation from scratch. He's also the person who coined cloud forensics as a service over a decade ago, a framework that's since been cited by researchers and universities worldwide. He saw the forensics gap in the cloud before most people even had a cloud strategy. Today, we're getting into agentic AI, what it actually takes to govern autonomous systems at an enterprise scale, and why John argues that AI is becoming the new insider threat. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, Will, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So for listeners, give us a quick picture of what you're responsible for right now and what scale are you operating at? Because you're actually running two significant roles simultaneously.
So with Thales and, Sutherland, it's something that I wrapped before Thales.
Okay.
With Thales, you're right. We are running an entire program in data security. We have data security posture management and a fabulous global team that, have been working on some really good innovation when it comes to data security. And on top of that, there's a plus of AI and AI data. And the challenges that we see when it comes to AI and AI data security. In years gone by, we knew that, hey, we had data classification we needed to look at. We had challenges with governance and policy and so on that we needed to frame up, shore up, improve on at times, in our traditional environment. Now with AI in the mix, everything is a force multiplier, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
At machine speed. So now it's how do we leverage AI to ensure that we can combat or we can keep up and I would say best a potential attack that's crafted with a malicious AI engine, AI agent, leverage, of course, AI within our environment. Data is the lifeblood of organizations, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with us, we, have been very forward thinking with things when it comes to AI security and, data security specifically. I'm sure you've seen the press release from Thales last year, where an AI security fabric, and then at RSA, the teams will be speaking a little bit more about that.
Mm.
But with our focus, multi-focus with data and AI, it's how does everything sync together, right? Because we're thinking edge, runtime, databases, input outputs, MCP, yeah, and so on. So all of these things are a factor when it comes to AI and things that we're working on. So I love how you jumped right at it and had no warm.
Oh, there's more. There's more.
Yeah, sure.
So let's kind of go back into the beginning, right? Because your on ramp into this world is differently from most security leaders I talk to. You started in oil and gas after high school, working on SCADA systems. So that's not your typical origin story. What happened there, and how did it shape the way you think now?
Yeah. So um, that was one of the best jobs I had. I'll be honest with you.
Mhm.
Um, and how does it shape who I am today, right? Working in with SCADA, it was, operations were tied to functions, which was tied to costs. So anything that went wrong on a chain, a pipeline chain,
Mhm.
a valve, something miscalibrating, it had a real impact. Um, and that laid the foundation for how I looked at technology on a whole, right? What is the outcomes? Why are we using technology? What is the outcomes we're trying to achieve? And how do we keep that, when you think about it from an objective to an outcome perspective, how do you keep it as simple as possible so that when we're thinking of an objective we want to achieve, make sure that, no pump is miscalibrated, or no valve, if it has an error in it, we can, you know, immediately act on that error to the simplification of, well, what's the outcome, right? The outcome is, well, we don't want it to blow. We don't want to
Mhm.
uh, spill.
Right.
When obviously we don't want the financial, the legal, the regulatory impacts that comes with, an issue like that. In that organization, I would say the CEO, I was employee number 22.
Mm.
The organization today has thousands of people, but I was employee number 22. And the CEO, because it was such a small shop at the time, really took me under his wing. And this was a gentleman who was a certified petroleum engineer, very well established. In fact, when he started the company, he didn't have to work again. He started because he was too young to retire, I believe.
Mm.
His philosophy was don't act without understanding what your outcome is. Don't act without thinking about what could go wrong. And that sort of trained my mindset, moving from SCADA to networking, to virtualization, to cloud, and then into security. It sort of, helped me build that foundation. But that foundation was built on a mentality and a philosophy of, understand what your outcomes are.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the earliest examples of the OT-IT convergence, right? And the attack surface that comes with it. Now, did you see it that way at the time, or is it just hindsight?
OT, in this hindsight,
Yeah. Mhm.
because at the time I wasn't dealing in security. I was looking at a system. You were setting up these systems. You were working with field engineers that were installing pumps, configuring, sensors, and not sensors in the sense of software sensors today, but, sensors in the sense of, flow monitoring sensor, pressure monitoring sensors,
Right, right.
things like that. Um, so back in the day, stories I've heard was users would have the username and password to log in to that SCADA system, paste it. So one person logged out, left his shift,
Mhm.
came in, used the same credentials, and logged in, right? So
Yeah.
that's, Modbus days, prior to anyone bringing in TCP/IP into the mix.
Mhm.
But security really wasn't top of mind, to be honest. in retrospect, I panic, right? But back
Yeah.
then, no.
So I want to unpack that a little bit, right? So you went from to Oxford for software engineering, then to Big Four, global telco, Fortune 200. At what was the turning point where security became the focus and not just the background?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Security never really was a focus when you're in IT. Well, it's sorry, security guys. It, back in the early days in IT ops, you build stuff, right? You know, I would say we started. Security was there. I'm not going to say it wasn't there. We had a ISO and we had, the BS regulations before ISO 27001, 2,
Yeah.
5, and so on, right? And of
Hmm.
course, we had NIST with their documentations and guidance and so on. But when you're in IT ops, you just want to make sure things work, right? You want to make sure that end users can do what they need to do with the systems they're interacting with.
Mm.
How I got involved in security was we were doing a data center transformation. We were converting, a data center site with multiple servers. We were putting some, VMware virtualization software on those systems to sort of reduce OpEx, right?
Hmm.
And while we were doing that, because it was a regulated entity, I started working with the IT auditors a little bit. Um, and then they started asking about, configurations, passwords, and network configurations, and stuff that we all know, right? From
Yeah,
an
yeah.
IT perspective.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, hang on, is this what auditors think security is? Um,
Mm.
so my leadership team said, well, man, you know all of this stuff. Just take on the responsibility for security, do the testing, the network testing, with the application team, start doing some of the, the software testing with the applications and so on. And that's basically how that switched happened because of, us moving into leveraging virtualization pre-cloud, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then when I started, so my master's is from a university, Royal Holloway, over in England. And Royal Holloway basically had, I would say, the oldest IT security program in the world. A lot of U.S. military back then, I was exposed to, moved over there to study, IT security. The late Fred Piper, modern father of cryptography, he lectured at Holloway. And that was pivotal in me moving over there for grad school. So
Mm.
I did IT security, digital forensics, and computer crime law. Um, and, one of my lecturers, John Austin, mentioned someone called Mark Pollitt over in the US.
Hmm.
Mark was and is the ultimate gentleman. He worked early days with the FBI computer crime unit, if not as the founder. And, he was instrumental in how I looked at security, both him and John Austin, as well as Fred, the late Fred Piper. And that led me to EY and, leveraging my background in IT ops and my understanding of security when we were doing the virtualization projects. That was the pivot for me in moving into, IT security. And the intent was not to be an IT security auditor,
Hmm.
operationalize IT security when we spoke to our clients, practical use of how you configure, practical guidance on how you should configure your systems as securely as possible. How you early days of, second factor authentication, right?
Hmm.
And, the importance of entitlements and privileges in your IAM environment. And then, of course, across your stack, right? Ensuring that you had the right controls, technical controls, you had the right audit testing, you had the right remediation planning, and you had the right risk exposure and risk classification based on practicality and operational functions, not, a checklist. So that was basically pivotal for me when I joined that big four firm, Ernst& Young, right after grad school, and pivoting into that security function.
Now, was there a specific project or even a failure that changed your philosophy on how automation and security have to work together?
That's I think we all have those stories,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
And it's funny, in one role I walked into, a couple days we had a breach, right?
Hmm.
And I was very fortunate to have a fantastic leadership team that I was reporting into, and even more fortunate to have a highly technical team um, 3 days into the job that understood when I started asking for stuff or giving directions. They knew exactly what I was talking about. There was no, we're unsure, we're not clear. And then, you know, within hours, there was that trust, right? Because everybody's moving in sync. Um, so when it comes to automation, you know, um, looking back over the last 10 to 15 years, what I would say is we all have learned from failures. And the point I was making with that example was I look back at things that went wrong and learned from it. And because I learned from what went wrong, when I hit that new job, I was able to act quickly because I've been through it before. I saw what went wrong. And when we think about automation and all of those things, with automation, it boils down to the basics, right? The basics
Mhm.
where when we think about autonomous systems at enterprise and thinking about how we scale that, we have to think about, basically the basics, right? Um, how you engage, how you onboard, how you set up, how you configure, how you have access controls in place, how you're ensuring that when systems interconnect with each other, we have a policy chain that moves across that interconnection and we have that route, right?
Right.
And of course, we always have to have things that are auditable and evidence based because of the auditors. And I learned that lesson at Ernst& Young. No, but I learned how to anticipate what an auditor would look for based on, at the time, it was, my God, this is a lot of work.
Hmm.
But I came out of EY a better person, a
Yeah.
better technologist, a better leader. And, my recommendation for anyone in college, thinking about a career in technology, go to a big four. Spend 3 years at a big four. It's a fantastic training ground. And not only are you exposed to multiple environments, but you're exposed to multiple layers of leadership. I remember a partner telling me then, one of the best partners I worked with, Joan Rawls, she was a managing partner out of New York at Ernst& Young, a fantastic mentor, fantastic advice. I also remember, in a meeting, this is what I was getting at. 1 year at a big four is equivalent to 7 years in enterprise. That was a stat that was thrown at me,
Yeah.
sorry. And I questioned why. How is that? And they're like, think of what you're doing. And I'm like, you're right. I am working 60-hour weeks, and I am handling 2 and 3 projects simultaneously as a
Hmm.
leader. Yeah. And I am interacting with CISOs and CIOs and CTOs and having to be able to speak to them at their level,
Yep.
as well as step down a notch or two and get technical with their direct reports. So it stretches you and it makes you think, beyond if you're in a corporate environment, I have this function, I have access control, I'm managing IAM, and that's it. At a big four, you're managing everything, from the edge to the application.
Yep.
That's basically why I thought, after I left there, it was a good thing for me, and I highly recommend it for anyone else. With back to your point about automation and so on, with innovation, some of the things that we have to think about when we're automating is the legacy systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can they tie in? Will something break? And if it breaks, do we have a backup plan?
Yeah.
Because when we think about, innovation and we tie innovation onto legacy control systems, we're hoping that old patterns, stick. And that's not usually the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Static approvals will break, as we know, under dynamic workflows. Broad service access gets reused far beyond what it's supposed to do, leading to operational failure, right? Or, challenges. And tool outputs, sometimes you put too much trust in that. And then that's things that, we have to think about when we're driving into automation and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things that people talk about a lot is controls. But the issue is not whether an organization can, name the right controls they have in place. Everybody knows that, all leadership knows that stuff. It's how are those controls attached to a point of decision or decision point, right? That's the most important thing. And when we think about access controls, we think about things like least privilege. Least privilege fails when access is granted for convenience instead of, you're binding it to a specific task based on
Mm-hmm.
based on an entitlement and so on. People talk about segmentation a lot. Man, I was all into segmentation till I saw it fail. You know, Segmentation fails when automated workflows cross trust boundaries without
Mm-hmm.
proper evaluation, right?
Sure.
Selective access fails when nobody can prove that access was tied to a specific purpose. And controls fails when they're treated as, entitlements instead
Oh,
of executable discipline.
I'm sorry.
So these are some of the lessons that we learn, right? Because in theory, you're like, oh, let's automate.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that goes into automation that a CTO can go into depth on, in terms of what went wrong, right? Looking
Right.
in. uh,
Now, that kind of leads me into the next question, right? You've been speaking and writing on the idea that AI is becoming the new insider threat. Um, so let's kind of dive a little deep into that. Now, walk me through the argument. When you say AI is a new insider threat, what does that actually look like? In theory and in
Um,
practice.
yeah, that's a loaded question, Mo.
Yeah.
So let's think about that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Um, so when we think about AI itself and we think about insider threats, there are, basically two ways you can look at that, right? Now, first of all, if we're not embracing AI, we're going to be left behind.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. AI is here as much as cloud computing came to be a thing, back in 2011, 2012. We have, I remember one of the top 10 billionaires in the US who owns a certain large corporation was not a fan of cloud. He thought it would disappear.
Yeah.
And now his company has a huge cloud service offering as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, with AI being the new insider threat, it's how are we using AI? That is the question. What are we using AI for? And when we're saying what are we using AI for, the third thing is how are we governing AI within our environment for
Mm-hmm.
we want to use it for and how we're using it, right? As an insider threat, when we're building AI systems, if we build agentic AI, um, one of the things that I've seen is overprivilege, access that agentic AI systems have. So, and I was just in a discussion with on this. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're thinking about insider threat, it's well, what do malicious actors go after? They go after data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go after some of them is stealing encrypted data with the hope that with quantum computing, they will be able to decrypt that fairly quickly in the near future. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no matter if they're stealing stuff that they can't decrypt, they're banking that for advances in quantum computing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. With the issue of insider threat, it's the how. How are we using it? Are we basically using public LLMs, Copilot, where we're putting data in there that we can see
Mm-hmm.
data leakage or data exposure, right? To the point of the agentic AI, are we overprivileging, giving these agents, privileges beyond what they should be granted, and thus opening them up to abuse or basically exposure, right? And with exposure comes data loss, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or data exposure. So those are the two things, that I think about when it comes to internal threats from AI. AI is starting to inherit a position that insiders used to hold, right? You want to look at spreadsheets in your financial system, you have an AI agent for that now. Uh, we're building systems. We talked about, Claude and other systems. We're building systems where we can connect to our email, our spreadsheets. We're building systems where now these agents can reply for us to do analytics on a series of spreadsheets and reply on questions asked of us. What's that's a level of trust we are giving a system that we may not give a human, right?
No.
Yeah. So for me, when we think about all of these things and we think about access and the internal tools that we are seeing, internal workflows, and in many cases, internal decision making authority, when we use traditional security tools, none of this looks malicious.
Mm-hmm.
None of it.
Right.
If we're at the topic with AI firewalls, where we can have prompt injections and basically potentially spread a malicious executable across multiple chunks of data that's sent to a vector database, for example, um, an AI firewall can miss a benign command. It will just see text, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the biggest insider threat is things that are malicious, that do not look malicious. And it becomes dangerous because it's familiar. So the classic insider threat was always someone or something on the inside with legitimate access,
Mm-hmm.
ability. They had the
Right.
ability to move faster than governance, right? AI is beginning to fit that pattern because, my team and I were just talking about it. We're seeing AI moving at machine speed where control and governance can't keep up. Let me correct that. Traditional control and governance can't keep up, and if we have a system that can see far more context than a normal application could, and as I was mentioning, it can pull from documents, chats,
Mm-hmm.
YARM records, core repositories, our cloud systems, knowledge bases, and combine that context into an action. And now we have a malicious user who can control that agent and control that action. We're in a whole lot of trouble.
Hmm. So, what does the governance architecturally need to look like, right? Not in theory. What does it look like to operationalize this in a real enterprise environment, right? Because there's not like a set, like you don't have like set governance when it comes to AI and AI agents, right? There's no paper written about them just yet. I know OWASP is coming up with, OWASP top 10 and LLM security and whatnot, but there's no, I guess, structured, you know, type of, research or strategy for governance in essence. So how do you guys combat that?
How do we combat the lack of governance or the
Yes.
fact that we're
R- Right, right. I mean, obviously, you can put guardrails. You can put there's different mitigation factors that you can do, but in theory, how do you create something that's not invented, essentially, right? How do you go? Kind of walk me through that.
how do you create something that's not invented, Will?
Yeah.
you, you bring somebody's gonna listen and say, "Oh, let's take notes and let's create a start."
Well, in theory, right? You got to be pioneers in this. I think there's going to be a bunch of pioneers in this era that are creating things that with AI, that haven't been done before, right? And I think governance is huge, right? And right now there's no de facto standard for that, you know?
Yeah. So at Thales, we are thinking about that. We have action plans in place for that. Our data security posture management platform, we do address risks. So we are looking at governance and so on. So it's not, and not only us, there are a slew of other
Mhm.
companies that are looking at this, in this industry. So when we think about AI from a governance standpoint, sorry,
Mhm.
uh, what we have to think about is, what is the system connected to? And at the end, can we provide verifiable proof of what the system was supposed to do? Did it do it or did it not do it? And then can we provide evidence of an action that occurred, right?
Mhm.
So in operation, governance basically will have to answer a few questions. Who authorized this system or agent,
Mhm.
um, to act? What identity, to your point earlier, is it operating under? And, we have been in industry, we have been talking about signed intent, right? Cryptographic trust and so on, and as you know, Thales is very strong in all things, when it comes to HSM's cryptographic trust and so on. And the other thing we'll talk about is what data sources is that AI system allowed to access. Tools and actions are in scope, right? We have to know that, right? And that's part of your audit trail, your governance there. And more importantly, when we think about all of that, we have to have that, I would say, baseline and a policy. So, what policy is being enforced at the moment of retrieval, for example, or decision or action that an agentic AI or AI system will take? And then, my point about the evidence, can we provide evidence that shows that an action, a system, an AI system, AI entity took, was permitted, right? So that's basically the baseline of when
Mhm.
we think about governance, how we're thinking about, approaching governance from an AI perspective there. Traditional governance, I mean, you know this, right? Traditional governance focused on users, applications,
Right.
data sources as separate control domains. What does AI do to that, right?
Mm.
AI collapses those domains into one running workflow.
Yeah.
So now governance has to travel with the workflow itself. So it's not just a committee, right? It's not just the audit committee or the GRC team or a standard that's been written. We want the standard. Absolutely, we want the standard. It's not even a review gate by itself, right? It's an operational control that combines policy. It starts with policy, and policy has to be enforced at the
Right.
API layer, the retrieval layer, the agentic layer, the action layer. And provenance itself now has to travel with that workflow, and permissions has to be basically tied to purpose What's the purpose? What's the actions that the agent is undertaking? Is that verified? Is that cryptographically signed? And then we time bound that so that now every meaningful action, we can reconstruct that from a forensics perspective, from an audit perspective, and so on. And that's basically how I see, the shift occurring when it comes to, AI governance itself.
Hmm. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the Sutherland engagement, right? You came in, retired an existing SOC, and rebuilt it with a partnership with, Google Security. Um, what was the hardest part in that project? You would
What
think.
was, uh, what was the
I'm
hardest?
sure. I'm sure there's so many. It's hard to pick from one, right?
Actually, Sutherland, I had a fantastic, Doug is a fantastic CIO.
Hmm.
Um, Doug is, Doug actually challenged with the projects Doug was leading when it came to Agentic AI, and the AI team really challenged me and taught me a lot about AI security, right? Because you had to research,
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so a challenge for any person is not having the right leadership. I was fortunate that I didn't have that challenge. I had good
Hmm.
leadership there. I had good partnership. The um, head of AI operations or head of IT operations, sorry, sat in India, fantastic gentleman.
Hmm.
And his team was superb. Very big on collaboration. And, I was always welcome in their meetings. The challenge, to your point, with any major transformation like that is ensuring that your financial teams are happy with what
Mm.
you right.
Okay. Yeah.
One, you have to make sure they're investing, right? They invest in company funds that they don't see a tangible ROI as if they had said, hey, let's throw $6 million into a PR marketing campaign. And we know from that, we could probably see 1.5x return, 2x return, right? You don't see that when you invest in security. The ROI in security is no incidents, no breach, no exposures, right? Or minimizing the risk of those things happening to a manageable exposure level. The second challenge you would see is how do I now, with this transformation, articulate to my cybersecurity insurers why I'm doing this and what does it mean for the risk profile of the organization, which is reducing it, right?
Hmm.
How does that in turn impact my cybersecurity insurance premium? Obviously, as a steward for the company, you want to make sure that you don't raise your cybersecurity premium. So
Right.
whatever tools you're putting in place, that's has to be explainable in a manner that the cybersecurity insurers will be happy. The third thing is technical, right? Um, the technical part with, I have a hard and fast rule where when it comes to service accounts, I don't like agents in my service accounts. No, that's a no-no for
Yeah.
me. Um, so when you think about that, you have to get creative in terms of how are you going to get data from service accounts to a collector in turn and send that over to your new security engine, right? And in our case, it was using Google Chronicle, Google Security, and we had bind plane in place as well. Um, the challenge, as with any organization doing such a large project, was ensuring one, your stakeholders were aware of what you were doing. They were clear on your dates and time for delivery. So there was no false expectations of, this could get done in a finite, a certain amount of time that was not realistic.
Yeah.
The third thing was ensuring that your collection, right? With any large organizations, you have multiple security tools in place. Collecting, normalizing, and transforming that data is the biggest challenge from a technical perspective. Um, Fortunately, again, I had a pretty good team. I had a good head of SOC who is now a CISO for a global organization.
Nice.
Uh, she was pretty fantastic, had fantastic relationships across the organization, which made my life so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so with that transformation, I was able to leverage um, her skills and her team's, I would say, collection of data from different endpoints. It made my life easier. All I had to do was convert that data. Took me about a week, to convert it and, from one format to another, and then hand that over to our engineers that was doing the data transformation. Google themselves was very helpful.
Mm.
Um, my WhatsApp was constantly blowing up. John, are you okay? Is there anything we can? You need to top 10. You want, so, much props to the Google security team and their support. They set up sessions for me with the directors, the engineers, so that I could understand how Chronicle worked. Even, I could ask for clarification on how Chronicle worked for things I wanted to get done.
Mm.
Um, so fantastic collaboration, across, IT ops, the internal teams, our CISO, our CIO, as well as the Google security team. But again, with any transformation is that data conversion, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
challenge.
Yeah.
Of course, Sutherland supporting some of the large organizations that it does, we had to make sure that data from our old systems were forensically sound. So that was another charge that
Yeah.
we had to take on to ensure that, as we move data around, it had to be proven to be unaffected, unchanged. That, if a customer asks for data from 3, 4 years ago, we can say, yep, here it is in its original state, and it's verified as being unaltered in any way possible.
Wow. I bet that was a interesting challenge, right? To do that. Um, now
And a good
you've
team.
Oh yeah,
And a good team.
that sounds like it. Definitely sounds like it. Now
Fantastic.
you've operated across SCADA systems, Big Four, global telco, 400 million transformation programs, SOC modernization, and now AI trust architecture at Thales. If you had to give one principle, one thing you'd pass on to every technical leader building fast right now, what would it be?
One principle
One
that I
principle,
had to
yeah.
pass, one principle that I had to pass on, collaboration, man.
Mm.
Um, Basically, when we think about large transformation, large organization, as an
Mhm.
engineer,
Yeah.
everybody knows me. I'm comfortable talking technical stuff all the time,
Mm.
every day, right? And I've had to learn to step it up a little bit.
Right.
Um, for me, the one principle is be true to yourself. Know your limits and know when to ask for help. Know when to leverage the skills of your team and understand that you're a leader. You don't need the spotlight.
Mm.
Your job, because you're hiring executive teams, trust you to do what you're doing. Your job is not to take the spotlight. Your job is to shine the spotlight on the good work being done by very capable people working with and for you.
Mm.
That's something my teams at Cognizant would say that. This guy would walk in and sit down next to us. I remember, I'll share the story.
Mhm.
We're doing this major IAM project for a very large financial institution. Um, the teams didn't really know me. I walked in, I sat next to one of them, and I said, just show me what you're doing. And the first question I asked the team is, how are you guys? What can I do to make your life easier? The first response I heard was, nobody has ever asked that before,
Mm.
high level. And I'm like, well, I apologize for that. But the thing is, you guys pay my salary, you know? And
Mhm.
my job was to make sure that they were comfortable in their job, knowing that they had that leadership support in what they were doing. And me sitting next to them was not, I want to watch what you're doing. I remember this one guy, Ravi, he's over at Ernst& Young now in a senior role.
Mm-hmm.
He taught me how to use SailPoint. I knew
Mm.
SailPoint theory, right? I knew how it worked. I was never an administrator for it until I sat next to him and he showed me how to onboard users, how to define privileges, how to put in entitlements, Um, and I would not have learned that if I didn't sit next to these guys and see what they're doing.
Mm.
What I always tried to do was with lunch and learn sessions, I always picked a project we were on, and I picked someone who shined at a project and had them present to the rest of the organization. And usually I would send an email up to the senior leadership team. This is
Mm.
what this gentleman did. There's a gentleman called Steven who did a huge PKI project for us at a global bank.
Mm-hmm.
I made sure that went all the way up to the CEO, and my boss was, well, John, it's your team. I was like, yeah, it's my team, but it's his success. And everybody needs to know about it.
Wow, that's great. Now, so tell me, what's something perhaps you're building or excited about, or even watching closely that our audience should pay attention to,
What's something that I'm building?
or excited about? Something in the industry that you're seeing, that we should be paying attention to. I know everybody's talking quantum, 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 but anything else that you're thinking?
Quantum's coming, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's coming. But today, today it's AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm pretty excited about what we can do with AI. You're seeing what Claude can do. You're seeing what, GPT can do. You're seeing what Copilot can do. And I'm pretty excited. I think it's not going to replace us per se. We have to retrain ourselves, right? It's going to enhance what we can do.
Yes.
And and that has me excited, especially for 2026. And I'm excited about what the work we're doing, at Thales when it comes to AI security.
Now, does your expectation change, for your employees now that you empower them with AI? Do you feel like the performance should 10x, or as a CISO, how do you see that?
If I put a CISO hat on,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say 10x,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't say we're going to put an AI agent in the SOC and expect it to run stuff,
Right.
you know. And there's, Anton Shirakin has from Google. He is doing some really good work when it comes to that.
Mhm.
Um, there's Aram Labs CEO Neha. She's doing some really good work with AI. What I see from a security perspective is we're going to use it, but we're going to use it responsibly. And we're
Mm.
always going to have that, for now, we'll have that human in the loop oversight. Um, there will be a time where, for a certain level of security, we may not need human in the loop for a certain level. But above that, of course, you would always have to have, some sort of human in the loop for maybe SOC analyst, for example. You can probably, in the near future, have an L1 SOC analyst that's an agentic AI, but that
Mhm.
has to be supervised by a human, right?
Yeah.
Um, so not 10x, but I would say responsible use and maybe 3, 4x,
Mhm. Mhm.
let's take baby steps, right? Not
Exactly.
Let's not just say, "Hey, yeah, hey, come on, handle security." No, and let's be responsible about it and test and deploy, and then build on that as we go forward.
John, this is exactly the conversation I built this show for. Real architecture, real trade-offs, real stakes. Thank you once again for being on the show. That's a wrap on this episode of Automated Die Trying. If something in this conversation landed for you, share it with someone who builds. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on LinkedIn for clips, guest announcements, and behind the scenes content. This is Automate or Die Trying. Until next time, Keep shipping, keep securing, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of deployed. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Take care, guys.